Have you ever heard someone say, I'm so OCD? Could be about keeping their pens nice and neat on the bench, or keeping their shoes nice and clean, or even having their clothes stacked away in their wardrobe, color-coded, outfit orientated, from jackets all the way to singlets. The term is so loosely thrown around like it's a trend gone viral, like it's some kind of cool thing to have OCD or be OCD. Sorry to say, but this disorder has now attracted an identity of being a stereotype. As the word stereotype implies, oversimplified. OCD is well underlooked and very, very misunderstood. Personally, I have never said that I am OCD. I would really not like to be some kind of disorder. The only time that I've actually referenced OCD for myself is I'll either say I have OCD or I'm experiencing OCD. Now, for starters, who wants to even admit that they have a disorder? Unless, of course, they are coming to grips with what they have to alleviate their suffering and to finally make the first step of awareness to getting rid of it. Now, in this video, I want to cover 4 misconceptions about OCD and also to give you some general information for you to take home. What this is going to do for those of you who are suffering, it's going to give you an understanding of what most people think but don't understand, and it's also going to give you a gateway to actually let people know what it's all about. As a sufferer myself, when I hear someone say, I am so OCD, it honestly makes me cringe. Like seeing those Facebook commercials come up saying, do this quiz to see if you're actually OCD. Every time I see that, I just cringe on the inside and it makes me, It's almost like your friend, bro, I'm like so OCD about keeping my beard really neat, you know, it's gotta look good. And I'm just like, oh my God, you have no idea. And for those of you who aren't suffering with it, well, this is a great precaution to just watch what you're saying, and also just to give you some general information so you actually know what the term OCD or Obsessive Compulsive Disorder means. Now let's start with some general information about OCD. Just so you know, I'm not just pulling stuff out of nowhere. I'm going to reference a book called the DSM-5, which many psychologists and specialists use to diagnose disorders and mental health issues. According to the DSM-5, it describes OCD as presence of obsessions, compulsions, or both. Now, obsessions may be defined as recurrent and persisting thoughts, urges, and impulses that are experienced at some time during the disturbance as intrusive and unwanted, and that in most individuals cause marked anxiety and distress. Now, this is where the other part actually comes in. The individual attempts to ignore or suppress such thoughts, urges, or images, or to neutralize them with some other thought or action. So, for example, performing the compulsion. Now, the compulsion side of things are defined as repetitive behaviors, for example, hand washing, ordering, checking, or mental acts such as praying, counting, repeating words silently, that the individual feels driven to perform in response to the obsession or according to the rules that must be applied rigidly. Now, these behaviors or mental acts are aimed at preventing or reducing anxiety or distress, or preventing some dreaded event or situation. However, these behaviors or mental acts are not connected in a realistic way with what they are designed to neutralize or prevent, or are clearly excessive. So essentially, it starts with an intrusive thought or a feeling that the experiencer may have that will have them do a compulsion in order to rescue that feeling, to have some kind of closure about the feeling, even though it may not correlate in any way, shape, or form. So let's say, for example, the fear of contamination, so the person experiencing OCD may wash their hands. Now that kind of is directly correlated. However, something else may be in the form of having to count 5 times in their head, otherwise their dog Larry is gonna die. That is not correlated at all, but this is what is happening inside a sufferer's brain. Unfortunately, every time that the person experiencing OCD acts on that compulsion, it's essentially solidifying the obsessive compulsive loop. So essentially, it starts with the obsession or the fear that stipulates into that anxiety or that feeling that the person has to alleviate, which then follows through to the compulsion that the person suffering with OCD acts on, and thus continuing the cycle for temporary relief. The brain sees that as a signal as temporary success. Either way, it's still success, so it solidifies the loop. So as that loop is solidified, the brain is actually registering that whatever that feeling was an actual threat. Personal struggles of mine, let's say back when I used to ride my BMX, out of nowhere, I could be riding into the bowl and a thought came into my head. If I didn't do a backflip, don't worry, I could do them back then, but if I didn't do a backflip, so this is like the last 2 seconds of entering the bowl, if I didn't do the backflip, the next time I do a backflip, I'm gonna break my neck. So of course I decided to do the backflip, just landed because there was no preparation involved, but that was the thought process going on in my head. These days, it may not be directly correlated. It can be something as far blown as if I don't tap my foot on the ground 3 times before I get from here to the door, my loved one might die. Even though there is no realistic probability of that happening, it still fires off a signal in my brain that it's going to happen, and it's almost as if that closure isn't met. So the signal keeps going. Now let's get stuck into the misconceptions. Misconception number 1. Everything needs to be neat and tidy. As much as I like my things neat and tidy, they can be scattered like anything. Back from a young age, I liked prepping my clothes out of my bed before I had to go to school, which was just convenient. However, this didn't harbor up an effect like a life or death situation, so I was completely fine if I didn't do it, if I forgot to do it. Other things may include having a nice neat fridge or a cupboard or a wardrobe. That's totally normal. Like it's just nice having your things in places that's just convenient to grab. On the other hand, the OCD sufferer is experiencing some internal turmoil that is self-destructing every second that they don't rearrange the fridge or clean their shoes. Misconception number 2. Everything needs to be clean. As much as having a nice clean house, clean car, clean shoes is nice, this is not always the case. There are so many forms of OCD, it doesn't just apply to having to be clean. For instance, I like my things neat and tidy, but I'm suffering with more of a ritualistic compulsion kind of OCD, not so much cleanliness, although that could be handy. I don't have to clean everything to the T. However, it's just convenient and nice to have a clean house. Misconception number 3. Apparently everyone is a little OCD. After I've tried to explain this to people, they're like, heck, I'm a little OCD. Let me break it down. A psychological disorder is an extreme version of behaviors or beliefs that most people might actually experience every now and again. However, actual OCD specialists define as when the symptoms start affecting their ability to function in everyday life. For instance, my obsessions or the triggers going on inside my brain are probably happening, I'd almost say, every 10 seconds. It's just an urge that pops up, almost like someone tapping on your shoulder every 10 seconds, and or are extremely distressing. I've been in situations where I just couldn't move because the compulsion didn't fix the thing I was trying to fix, and I was like, what do I do? So let's just stop here and cry. And or when the sufferer is a danger to themselves. Now, I've been in a situation where I'm driving along and a belief came into my head that said, if I don't tap the steering wheel 5 times before I hit this roundabout, I can't turn the steering wheel. So I get to the roundabout and I've only tapped it 3 times and I just about drove up the damn curb. So let me just put this straight. Most people are not just a little bit OCD. For the person that's suffering OCD, it is every single day, not just every now and again. Now, scientists have actually come to the conclusion that there are certain parts of the brain of an OCD sufferer that aren't working properly. I'm going to go into a lot more detail in another video. However, these parts of the brain are responsible for regulating urges and impulses. So for example, the impulse to go get something to eat because you're hungry, or go to the toilet because you need to go to the toilet, or even just getting angry about something or getting sad about something. Now these parts of the brain, because they're not actually working, what's actually happening is when you follow up with something to bring closure to the situation. So for instance, if something made you angry, then you did something to alleviate that anger, the brain isn't actually signaling complete. It's on permanent on because that signal didn't get received. So for example, the need to lock the door just to make sure your stuff doesn't get stolen. As you lock the door, then you go out, then that signal doesn't get closure, or the part of the brain isn't fired up that signals complete. So that person suffering with that kind of OCD has to go back and check it again. And then as they leave, it's still not turning off. You could imagine how annoying that could be. On to misconception number 4. OCD is not treatable. Now, when I came to grips with having OCD and I read that, I was just like, oh my God, let me make this straight. There is treatment. I was like, I'll be damned if I'm completing this lifetime without treatment and getting rid of this. So there are such things as CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. Essentially, a psychologist or a therapist goes over a patient and tries to dig out the underlying fear that is actually causing the obsession to the rest of the loop in OCD. They work closely together to eventually get to the point where they're targeting the compulsions that are happening. Slowly but surely, those loops start slowing down because the person is actually realizing that fear is just illusory and the belief is nothing but a belief. Another type of therapy is ERP, exposure response and prevention therapy. Now, it's pretty similar to CBT. However, the psychologist or therapist is working a lot closer to the compulsions. Of course, they have to go through the whole process, working with the underlying fear. Now, as soon as they work through that fear, they are actually exposed more so to the compulsion or the threat itself. The more that this is done and the person is exposed to the very thing that they're fearful of after they work out it's just a belief, the more and more they get comfortable with it, the less anxious they are and the less stressed they are, so they can live happily ever after. The next treatment I'm going to talk about is medication. Now, I'm not a huge advocate for medication, but apparently it's one of the best treatments going. Now, I just want to make this clear. Medication should only be used sparingly. It's like a band-aid. It should be temporary. You don't want to be on something for the rest of your life, because medication is, yes, screwing with your chemicals. It's going to make you better. However, it's not fixing the crux of the problem, the actual root of the cause, which CBT and ERP are actually getting to the bottom of. Medication will obviously make it easier to work with that stuff, which is why it's definitely recommended to work in conjunction with one another. Now, the type of medication I'm talking about is called an SRI, which stands for serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Essentially, this is going to leave the brain with more available serotonin. Now, serotonin is responsible for signals to and from the brain and the body. Essentially, this means that there is more signaling capacity to go towards that dysfunctional impulse system, so you can actually get closure on the loop. Instead of the message being just lost in transmission and the person having no closure whatsoever, the person is able to complete the impulse without having it come back again and have that fear terrorizing them into a life or death standoff. Now, you could only imagine the relief that the person suffering is going to have by being able to complete that loop with closure and, let them feel like locking the door and leaving just once is okay, or washing their hands once and leaving it is okay. Imagine the time that is saved. Imagine the energy that is received back, not only from the compulsions in themselves expending energy, but just the feeling and the frustration and the energy utilized in the brain and the confidence that comes with being able to complete things in a normal order and continue on with life. So my experience with medication probably wasn't the best one. There are different types of SRIs, which I'll go into in another video. However, I just felt really spacey, I felt nauseous, so there is going to be side effects. However, I did find that when I did feel good, I had to time it so that I did feel like I actually wanted to work on the inside. So I wanted to work on my mentality and dig out the underlying causes. Now, that takes a lot of grit and a lot of determination to tackle, which the medication does make it easier, but on the side of the side effects, it really doesn't. So it's much of a muchness. However, please take it with a grain of salt when I say it is only a band-aid. Treat it as a band-aid. It has to come off at some stage, so just make sure that you do everything that you can to heal yourself while that is on. So for those of you who do throw that term around loosely, please be careful. You don't know who's listening. It could be annoying, or even worse, it could actually make the person that's suffering with it not want to admit that they have it because they just feel isolated and weird, and it's just not nice. And I think that's the first step into actually recovering from this disorder, is being able to speak up and say, this is bothering me, this is making me suffer in day-to-day life. That's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for watching for Misconceptions to OCD. I hope you enjoyed the video, everyone. I hope it gave you some good information and advice that you can take with you. Now, my aim is to raise as much awareness about OCD that people that are suffering can feel free to speak up and admit that they have something going on. Now, this is going to be the first step into the healing process. All the time, energy, focus, and attention that can be taken from a person that is suffering with OCD can be not only detrimental to them, but even those around them. It can just be debilitating. I wish to free as many minds as possible so that the people that are suffering and the world can rejoice and we can be more connected as a whole. Thank you so much for watching. It honestly means so much to me that you're even watching up to this point. If you'd like to follow along, please feel free to subscribe to the OCD Unlocked YouTube channel, follow and like the Facebook page, and even follow along the Instagram page. And I'll be posting up as much content, advice, and information as I can on a weekly and hopefully on a daily basis. So thank you so much again. It means the world to me. I'll see you in the next video.